I'm not the type to blast my personal drama, but everything has gotten so twisted that I need to set the record straight. My name is Haley, and I've been with Tristan for almost a year. He's thoughtful, sweet, and supportive. My best friend, Maddie, has been in my life since high school. I never expected introducing her to Tristan would end with her calling him dangerous and me questioning everything about her. Maddie was in town for work, so Tristan and I planned for them to finally meet. I'd been raving about Tristan to her and telling him funny stories about her. It felt like a big deal. My best friend meeting the guy I had serious long-term plans with. Everything started off fine at a cozy bistro near my apartment. After we ordered, I excused myself to the bathroom. I glanced back and saw Maddie and Tristan talking quietly. It looked innocent enough. I had no clue I was walking into a storm. Less than an hour later, my world flipped. The conversation flowed smoothly at first. We joked about old memories, teased each other about high school pranks, and Tristan shared a funny story about his childhood. After we ordered, I stepped away, leaving them on good terms, or so I assumed. When I got back, Maddie was glaring at Tristan like she wanted to lunge across the table. Her eyes were wild and her posture was stiff. Before I could ask, she spat out that I deserved better and that she wouldn't sit there and pretend he was a good guy. Tristan tried to speak, but she waved him off, accusing him of manipulation. I stood there, purse in hand, stunned. It was completely out of character for Maddie. When I tried to calm her, she just grabbed her coat and stormed out. Tristan apologized, baffled by her reaction. I felt mortified. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath as I slid into my seat. Maddie's meltdown left me confused and worried. I'd never seen her explode like that. That night, I texted Maddie, pleading for an explanation. Her replies rattled me. She claimed Tristan was dangerous, that he'd threatened her, and that I had to trust her instincts. None of it sounded remotely like the Tristan I knew. Then she posted a cryptic social media message about protecting loved ones who are stuck in a bad situation. Suddenly, friends and acquaintances bombarded me with questions about whether Tristan was abusive. It felt surreal. I kept asking Maddie for details, but she refused to elaborate. She just insisted she was doing this for my own good. Meanwhile, Tristan was genuinely hurt. He reached out to Maddie, hoping to clarify the misunderstanding. Instead, she threatened him, telling him to stay away from me. I felt torn. Maddie was my best friend, but nothing she said aligned with who Tristan really was. Anxiety kept me awake all night. The next day, I demanded a full explanation from Tristan. He said that while I was in the bathroom, he asked Maddie about engagement rings. He wanted to propose soon and figured she'd know my taste. According to him, she immediately told him he had no right to rush me into marriage. He tried to explain that we'd already talked about our future, but she grew hostile. By the time I returned, things had boiled over. At first, I hoped this was a misunderstanding, but when I tried to talk to Maddie, she refused to listen, texting me a warning. If you don't leave him, you'll see what happens. My stomach dropped. This was beyond concern for me. It felt like blackmail. I couldn't believe my best friend would sabotage my relationship over her own fears or jealousy. I felt a toxic swirl of anger and heartbreak. In the following days, Maddie messaged people in our circle, telling them Tristan had a history of harassing exes or that he'd assaulted me. All lies. My phone lit up with concerned messages and offers of help. Tristan, upset and confused, showed me how strangers were harassing him online, calling him a monster. I confronted Maddie again, begging her to stop. She insisted I was naive and that she was just protecting me. That's when I realized it wasn't a misunderstanding. She was willfully destroying Tristan's reputation to keep me from marrying him. I thought back to everything I'd done for her, letting her crash at my place when her fiancé cheated, connecting her with people in my field. It was a cruel betrayal, and my anger festered. I knew I had to stop her, not just for Tristan, but for my own sanity. I started with damage control, talking to every friend who reached out, showing them Tristan's screenshots of Maddie's hostile messages. Many believed me and realized Maddie's claims were baseless, but some found her story too compelling. Fine, I thought. Good riddance if they won't see reason. Next, I gathered evidence. I collected screenshots and voice clips from anyone she'd contacted. She was spinning tales of Tristan locking me in rooms, threatening my life, and more. Seeing her lies laid out was horrifying. Tristan was shaken, but he left it up to me to decide how to handle it. I decided I wouldn't let her get away with it. If she wanted to ruin our lives, I'd show her the consequences. No forgiveness, only the truth, weaponized. Maddie valued her career above all else, so I contacted her boss, attaching proof of her defamation campaign. I framed it as a concern for her stability, noting she'd used company resources. Then I messaged a high-profile contact in her field, calmly presenting the same evidence. I didn't exaggerate. I just let her words speak for themselves. Within a week, people told me Maddie's big project was put on pause, and she was called into a serious meeting at work. She called me in a rage, accusing me of destroying her life. She demanded I retract everything, but there was nothing to retract. She'd lied, and I'd simply exposed it. My guilt was minimal compared to the damage she'd done to Tristan. She threatened me again before slamming the phone down, but I felt no remorse. I was done being her victim. Tristan and I decided to refocus on our relationship. The chaos had tainted his proposal plans, so we put that on hold until we could breathe again. We spent our nights cooking together and binge-watching shows, trying to find some sense of normalcy. Meanwhile, Maddie's stories fell apart. Those who believed her found glaring inconsistencies. She tried claiming it was all a misunderstanding or that she'd been acting out of genuine concern, but the evidence spoke volumes. She even reached out through a mutual friend, suggesting we could talk if I apologized. It was laughable. I told them I wanted nothing to do with her. She'd burned that bridge. Our decade of friendship was reduced to ashes by her own hand. In the end, her job was spared, but she lost a major promotion and much of her professional support. Some might say I was ruthless, but I felt justified. She tried to paint Tristan as a monster, and I made sure she faced the truth. Now, Tristan and I are stronger. We haven't set a new date for an engagement, but we're happy. I cut Maddie out completely, and I don't forgive her. That's how betrayal works. You either let it break you, or you fight back. I chose revenge, and I have no regrets. Even after I cut her out, the repercussions of Maddie's actions still reverberated through my life. Some acquaintances were hesitant to reconnect with me, worried they'd be caught in the crossfire. At first, it stung. I'd scroll through social media, see photos of gatherings I wasn't invited to, and feel a pang of betrayal from people who claimed neutrality. But I tried to remind myself that anyone who sided with a liar without questioning her motives wasn't someone I needed in my corner. I poured my energy into the relationships that mattered, reaching out to old friends who'd shown me kindness when the drama first exploded. They'd ask if I was okay, and I'd hesitate, unsure how to summarize the emotional whiplash of losing my best friend and defending my boyfriend. Tristan was my rock. Some nights I'd wake up in a cold sweat, replaying Maddie's threats in my head. He'd hold me, reminding me that we had nothing to hide. We were the truthful ones in this mess. Sometimes he'd try to lighten the mood by joking that we should have eloped before Maddie had the chance to meddle. I'd laugh, but there was an ache behind my smile. I couldn't believe how far she'd gone over something as joyful as marriage. It wasn't just about the proposal. It felt like she needed me to remain perpetually single so I'd stay locked into our old routines. If I got married, I'd no longer be at her beck and call, and maybe that scared her. I remember the day I finally blocked her on all platforms. My phone vibrated with one last message, a long rant about how I was making the biggest mistake of my life. She wrote that I'd regret choosing a man over her, that we were supposed to be sisters forever, and that real best friends protect each other from harm. Reading that made my blood boil. If she truly believed Tristan was harmful, she should have come to me in private. Instead, she lied to half the city. Blocking her was the only way to preserve my peace. As time passed, I discovered more layers to Maddie's motivation. A mutual friend, who remained neutral throughout, confessed that Maddie had been dealing with jealousy issues for months. Apparently, Maddie mentioned feeling left behind whenever I talked about moving in with Tristan or about the possibility of kids one day. She was terrified we'd drift apart, that I'd no longer have time for her. It didn't help that her own romantic life was in shambles. After her cheating fiancé left, she bounced from one failed relationship to another, struggling to find stability. It was heartbreaking to learn she harbored such deep insecurities but chose to handle them with sabotage rather than communication. Part of me felt a twinge of pity, but the damage she inflicted was too severe for me to dwell in sympathy. One evening, I bumped into an old acquaintance who admitted she'd initially believed Maddie's story, Because Maddie spoke with such conviction and tears in her eyes, she genuinely seemed terrified for me. That acquaintance said Maddie's performance was so convincing it gave her goosebumps. Hearing that was a revelation. Maddie had manufactured a whole persona, weaving a tale of Tristan's so-called red flags and violent tendencies. She cried on cue, claiming she was powerless to stop me from walking into doom. The acquaintance eventually realized it was all an act when she saw how inconsistent Maddie's statements became. It was shocking to learn Maddie went to such lengths, but it solidified my resolve. This wasn't a friend concerned for my safety, it was someone acting out of desperation and resentment. Another friend confided that Maddie was still trying to do damage control by claiming Tristan's vibe was menacing, that she just felt something was off. But people saw through her vague warnings. The more she tried to stir suspicion, the more she lost credibility. It was both sad and satisfying to watch her unravel. Despite the chaos, I still had to live my daily life, go to work, pay bills, juggle responsibilities. But there were moments I'd be at my desk and a wave of anger would wash over me. I'd remember Maddie's chilling text. "If you don't leave him, you'll see what happens." She'd spoken like a villain from a cheap thriller, yet the consequences were painfully real. She'd made me question my own judgment, turned my social life into a battleground, and forced my boyfriend to defend himself against baseless accusations. I was determined never to let her or anyone else wield that kind of power over me again. Tristan suggested we see a counselor together, not because our relationship was fractured, but because we were both scarred by the betrayal. It was a wise decision. In those sessions, we talked about the trust issues Maddie's lies had planted. Even though I believed Tristan, I realized I was on edge, worried something else might blindside me. The counselor guided us to open up about our fears instead of bottling them up. We learned to validate each other's concerns. If Maddie had just been honest from the start, we might have resolved this without collateral damage. But she'd chosen war, leaving us to pick up the pieces. On my own, I read about toxic friendships, recognizing signs that Maddie had been subtly undermining my other relationships for years. It explained why she never liked me hanging out with certain friends, why she got irrationally angry if I couldn't drop everything to see her. She was territorial and controlling in ways I had dismissed. A layer of guilt peeled away. I realized I hadn't done anything wrong by moving on with my life. Her issues were her own. Accepting that truth was freeing. Each day without her interference felt like a weight lifting off my chest. I saw a future with Tristan untainted by her manipulations, and it made me all the more certain that cutting her out was the right decision. The backlash against Maddie in her professional sphere wasn't immediate, but it was inevitable. A few months later, a colleague mentioned she'd been passed over for yet another promotion. The formal explanation was her lack of teamwork and questionable judgment. Apparently, word had gotten around that she was prone to orchestrating vendettas. Nobody wanted to collaborate with someone who might turn vicious at the slightest provocation. I won't pretend I didn't feel a spark of vindication. But I never gloated in public. By then, Tristan and I had moved in together. We focused on rebuilding the life she'd tried to tear apart. He asked if I was ready to talk about a ring again. I told him I wanted us both fully healed before taking that step. I didn't want our engagement overshadowed by her toxicity. In a show of solidarity, some friends suggested we throw a housewarming to celebrate the next chapter. We invited a handful of people we trusted. Over dinner, the conversation shifted briefly to Maddie, and I was surprised at how calm I felt discussing her. A friend mentioned seeing her recently. She'd looked anxious and avoided eye contact, rambling about being misunderstood. People had grown tired of her inconsistent claims. Listening to that, I felt relief rather than anger. I'd spent so long defending Tristan and myself. Now the truth was doing the work for me. We finished the night with laughter, good food, and a sense of closure. I realized I no longer needed to justify anything. Maddie's lies had suffocated me, but now I was finally breathing again. Months turned into nearly a year, and life finally settled into a comfortable rhythm. Tristan and I took a weekend trip to a cozy bed and breakfast, where we spent our days hiking and our nights making s'mores by a fire pit. We talked about the future without that ever-present knot of tension in my stomach. One quiet Sunday morning, as we lounged on the couch in our pajamas with cups of coffee, Tristan slipped a ring onto my finger. He apologized for the lack of grandeur, but I shook my head, tears in my eyes. It was perfect because it was ours. untouched by sabotage or drama. I said yes. When the news spread, well-wishers reached out. Some were folks who distanced themselves during Maddie's smear campaign, now offering belated congratulations. I appreciated the thought, but I kept my guard up. I'd learned the hard way that trust shouldn't be given freely once it's been trampled. Meanwhile, Maddie fired off one last email, a congratulatory note laced with sarcasm, hinting that Tristan would eventually reveal his true colors. She also offered a half-hearted apology, blaming stress and alcohol for her behavior. I stared at the email, feeling nothing but a dull emptiness. This was the person who'd once known my deepest secrets. Now, she was just a bitter footnote in my life. Without responding, I deleted her message and blocked her email. That was the final chord in our broken symphony. Sometimes people ask if I regret how far I took things. They wonder if I wish I'd tried harder to patch things up. My answer is always the same. Maddie attacked the person I love with calculated lies, nearly derailing my life. She forced my hand. I'm not ashamed of defending my happiness. Maddie taught me a painful lesson about betrayal, but she also revealed a part of me I hadn't known, the part that refused to back down. I learned that standing up for yourself and those you love is worth the fallout. It's worth the lost friendships, the headaches, the long nights of stress. Because in the end, the truth stood taller than her lies. And I've grown stronger because of it. I will never forgive her. I only regret not ending the friendship sooner. I am free, and that is enough.